Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and on this episode, I am pumped to have Bob Stoll on the show. He is the owner and founder of Dr. Bob Sports, and Dr. Bob Sports is the gold standard for football handicapping. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ed. It's good to be back.
Awesome. How's your football season starting?
Not bad. College has been good. NFL has been a little down. Had a couple weird things happen, like the New York Giants kicker getting injured in pregame warm-ups and being, the second team ever to score 3 touchdowns and not allow a touchdown to lose because they couldn't kick extra points, and they couldn't kick the game-winning field goal from 40 yards out because they didn't have a kicker. And so that was, I've had a couple games in the NFL that probably should have gone the other way, but I mean, in the long run that evens out. So I'm not too worried about it. Overall, a couple games above 500, it's not killing me.
And your NFL record, well, and your college record too, has been spectacular. So we'll get into that. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Rank Sports Betting and Newsletter. Looking for some action on any given weekend? This is the free service for you. As 5 Nugget Saturday is my curated list of tips and analytics. You'll get tips from people like Bob Stoll who are sharp. To sign up for free, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting information through data and analytics. That's thepowerrank.com. Bob, let's just start by going through your handicapping process. What does that look like in 2024? And in particular, how are you using numbers to inform that approach?
Well, I mean, what I do early in the season is very different from what I do once the season sort of, 5 or 4 or 5, 6 weeks in. Before the season starts, I go over every single team. I track the number of percentage of returning statistics, basically. My model is broken down in components: running offense, passing offense, run defense, special teams, etc. And basically, the model predicts the statistics for a team if they were to face an average FBS team. So when I have normalized statistics, I can then pit those teams together and create a predicted box score and go from there. So what I have is all these components, ratings going back, 25 years for every single team, every single year. And I've also logged returning player data, as I mentioned, what percentage of tackles, what percentage of sacks are returning, tackles for loss, passes defended, is the quarterback returning starter, what's the percentage of receiving yards, running yards, offensive line starts, is the offense coordinator new, is the defense coordinator new or the same, new head coach, etc. And from all of that data, I can come up with algorithms that project differences in performance from the previous year in each component of a team's rating based on that returning production and some other things. I mean, and you're going to get different things, whether it's returning head coach, returning offense coordinator. There are different algorithms depending on the scenario of each team. So it's not just a cookie cutter approach. I really dig into that. And there's a range. It's not like I'm also just, here's what the algorithm says and here's what I'm going to do. I have a range that I think a team can be in for any given metric or any given component. And I'll pick one to start the season. But if a team shows me that they are on one side of the range or another pretty early on, I'll go to that side of the range pretty quickly, especially with a team with a new coach or new quarterback. Whereas an established team with the same coaching staff and the same quarterback and whatever else, or pretty much the same defense, I won't change their rating as quickly as I might in a situation with a team that's very new and unknown. I'll be quicker to you are what you are sort of thing early on than I will with an established sort of team. So it's sort of an art form. There's certainly like I said, algorithms that I predict these things, but I consider it an art form. And I've got, nearly 40 years of experience doing this. So I've become very good at identifying, where a team should be coming into the season. And, you've got my priors over the years and my ratings are as good or better than anyone's. My season win totals have been ridiculously good.
They are really, really good. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I've run them. So we should pull that up next time. That's my fault. We'll pull that up and look at it. But Bob, we're week 5 in the college football season. Maybe give us a sense for how you start incorporating that early season data and changing these ratings based on what you see.
Yeah, like I said, like after a week or 2 weeks, I'll change teams. Like I said, the teams with new, with sort of a bigger range. I'll change those teams a little more than I will established teams. And as each game goes into play, I will continue to change those ratings each week, and I do those manually for the first 3-4 weeks. Which is, but now we're sort of getting into math model range. Once a team's played 4 or 5 games, then I'm almost exclusively going to the in-season data. I drop my priors. As a lot of your listeners know, prior is how you rate a team heading into the season. It's called a prior, and I drop my priors earlier in college football than the market does, and that most handicappers do. But I've had success doing that. So I'm not, I certainly have no reason to not do that because it's worked for me. But in the NFL, the priors will linger all the way through the season, and you're still using them in the playoffs. But in college football, I've dropped the priors earlier than most people. So once I'm into week 5, which is about now, I'm pretty much looking at, in-season data, unless the team's only played 3 games, in which case the prior is still a part of their rating. But otherwise, I'm pretty much, what have you done through those first 4 games? That's what I'm looking at starting this week, pretty much. So it's pretty much in-season math model from this point on.
And the math model is using data like yards per play and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I play differentials, yards per play, do some special team stuff. Everything's compensated, like I said, based on the schedule you faced, and put into component ratings, compensated run offense, run defense, pass offense, etc. And then, normalized. And then, once every team stats are normalized, then I match up against who they're playing, and it, predicts a box score from that. And from a box score, I get a predicted score.
Excellent. Is there a week 5 bet based on this data in your handicapping that you'd be willing to share with us?
Yeah, I like Washington. I think they game's on Friday night against Rutgers. It's Friday night at Rutgers. Washington was a 3-point underdog. I released Washington to my clients, and the line went down to 2.5. There's a good chance it might go back up to 3. I can understand the love for Rutgers. Scarlet Knights, continue to ascend under Greg Schiano, their head coach. But I don't understand why the market's not really appreciative of Washington and what they're doing under a proven head coach of their own, Jed Fish, who turned Arizona around the last few years. And then, it's not a rebuilding process at Washington. They made the national championship game last year, and obviously they lost a lot of key players from that team. But this is still a really talented team. In fact, Washington entered the season, like I said, short on returning experience, but they had the number 30 overall talent rating compared to Rutgers' number 53 talent rating. And he's put that talent together really quickly. A lot of times new coaches with a bunch of new starters will usually play worse in their talent rating, but that has not been the case with Washington. They've played really well, both sides of the ball, actually. You want to start with their offense. They've got Will Rogers, who used to play for Mississippi State. Now, here's a quarterback that's completed 70% of his nearly 2,000 career pass attempts. He's completing 76% of his passes in Coach Fish's system, and that's not unrealistic for that accuracy to continue, given that Noah Fafita, who was the quarterback at Arizona last year, completed 72.4% of his passes for the Wildcats last year in the same system. This year, under a different system, Fafita's only completing 63.6% of his passes. So you have a guy that's completed 70% of his passes in career now coming to an offense that historically has done really well as far as completion percentage goes. And it's not just dink and dunk. I mean, they're throwing the ball down the field. Rogers is averaging 8.3 yards per pass play. So he's done a really good job overall. Plus, you've got a running attack. Jonah Coleman's the running back for Washington. He ran for over 1,200 yards at 6.1 yards a run at Arizona for last year for Fish. Fish brought him on to Washington, and he's averaging 6.7 yards per run so far this season. So the offense is really clicking. And defensively, Washington has played extremely well. They're only allowing 43% completion through 4 games. And they've played 2 power conference teams, Washington State and Northwestern, and only allowed 41% completions to those 2 teams. Now you've got a Rutgers offense that they're going up against now. They've got a quarterback, Ethan Kaliakmanis, who was the quarterback for Minnesota for a couple years. At Minnesota in 2 seasons, over 400 passes, he only completed 53% of his passes. He's completed more than that this year, 62.5. but he also played Howard and Akron. Anyone's stats can look good against Howard and Akron. He played okay in the one game against Virginia Tech last week, but Rutgers got outgained in that win. I mean, they won the game, but I think they were +2 in turnover margin, but they were outplayed in yards per play in that game. So a little bit of a phony win. Kalakmanis is not an accurate passer, and it's hard to complete passes against Washington's press coverage. So I think the offense is going to really struggle. And Washington's been stopping the run as well. And Rutgers' run offense looks really good. They're averaging 5.7 yards per rushing play, but they face teams that would allow 5.9 yards per rushing play to an average offensive team. So they've been mediocre, really, running the ball when you take into account who they've faced so far. And Washington has a better than average run defense. So I don't think Rutgers' offense is going to do much. And the Rutgers defense, which is what they're sort of known for, they've allowed 4.8 yards per play in 3 games. But like I said, Howard and Akron, terrible offensive teams. And the 3 teams they faced would allow would only average 4.8 against an average defensive team. So they've been about average defensively. I have them ranked a little bit better than that because coming into the season, I had them 0.4 yards per play better than average on defense. And that's exactly the level they played at against Virginia Tech. So I'll assume that's their defensive rating. But Washington's got a much better offense than the Rutgers defense, and Washington's defense is much better than the Rutgers offense. I think Washington should be favored by 3 points, not getting a field goal. So Washington is clearly a bet for me. They were a stronger bet at +3. I still like them as a bet at down to +1. And like I said, it's 2.5 now. I'd wait to see if it goes back up to 3. But if not, it's okay to bet as an underdog of 1 or more.
Is Will Rogers like 30 years old now? It feels like he's been.
You think so? I think this is his 6th year.
Right.
I think this is his 6th year.
Mississippi State, right? When
he was there under Leach.
Yeah.
And struggled in a new offense. They, obviously Leach passed away, and they brought in a new coaching staff, and it didn't really suit him, that particular type of offense. This one does. It's a quick reads and bam, get rid of the ball, and that's what he does really, really well. Gets rid of it quickly and on time with accuracy. So that's exactly what Jed Fish wants in his quarterback. So he knew who to get in the transfer portal. He went after Rogers, and it's paid off so far. Plus, they're looking good on both sides of the ball. And I think that loss to Washington State, maybe that's why they're not getting appreciated. But they outplayed Washington State in that game, and Washington State's undefeated. So it's not like they lost to a bad team. But they had 464 yards at 7 yards of play in that game against Washington State. Washington State had 384 yards at 6.1 yards per play. So they outgained it by 80 yards and 0.9 yards per play. So they outplayed Washington State. So a little bit of a fluke loss there, and maybe that's hurting them in the market a little bit. But I'm all about Washington. I think they're gonna have a good season.
That sounds great, Bob. You mentioned a talent rating. What goes into that?
Well, it used to be. I used to look at just recruiting ratings, like how good was your recruiting class 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, last year, this year, et cetera. And then it's weighted, based on obviously the recruiting class you just got is not necessarily going to be weighted as much as the one you got 2 and 3 years ago, because those are the guys that are probably getting most of the snaps. Things have changed with the transfer portal. So now it's talent rating rather than recruiting rating, and it's just a compilation of 3 different recruiting sites, recruiting sources, and it's sort of like sort of weighted toward starters getting more, quarterbacks getting a heavier weighting than offensive linemen and stuff like that. So it's kind of a talent rating, a weighted talent rating based on 3 different talent recruiting services, based on current personnel that you have, and obviously starters are weighted heavier than backups, et cetera. But it's
right. So the current players are being rated based on. Sorry, the transfers are being rated on how they played at their last program.
Well, it's a couple things. So the talent rating, the talent rating is just your recruiting rating coming out of high school. Okay. Now, in my ratings, I do take into account there is a bump built in for production. Okay. So if you were a 3-star recruit and you've played like an All-American, like if you were Baker Mayfield and you were not necessarily a highly recruited player at Texas Tech, but then you played really well at Texas Tech before Patrick Mahomes took your job, and then you went to Oklahoma. Well, you're not at Oklahoma. You're not necessarily a 3-star recruit. You're going to be a little higher than that because you've proven that you can play at that level. And obviously now you're in a great system at Oklahoma. So obviously Baker Mayfield did really well. So in a case like that, his recruiting rating would be sort of replaced by his production rating and put on the same scale. So it takes a while to do these every year.
Of course.
But it's part of what I do, and it takes me a couple months to go through all the teams and do all this stuff. So I do put it into one number called a talent rating, which is a combination of recruiting ratings and production.
Bob, Georgia goes to Alabama in the biggest week of Game 5. Maybe go through what your model says about the game and what you see happening.
It's the model's pretty much on market. Georgia struggled with Kentucky before the bye week, but then that's just one game, and the Bulldogs dominated Clemson, and that Clemson win is looking better and better each week as Clemson's just rolling everyone else. So the Clemson offense looks pretty darn good, and they held Clemson to 3 points. So Georgia has my number 1 rated defense right now, and coming into the season, they were, I think, pretty neck and neck with Iowa. And now they are the number 1 rated defense, and Alabama has the number 2 rated defense right now. They're playing extremely well. Also, they're not allowing anything through the air. The one issue that the Tide have had defensively is the last 2 weeks, so not the last 2 weeks because they had a bye week, but the last 2 games against South Florida and Wisconsin, they gave up an average of 194 rushing yards per game. That does not include sacks. I put sacks in my pass yardage stuff. But they've allowed 4.9 yards per rushing play the last 2 games to South Florida and Wisconsin. A little bit of a concern against the Georgia team, whose offense sort of is predicated on establishing the run. Alabama, obviously they'd like to run it too. I don't know if they're going to do anything particularly well because Georgia has no weakness on defense, whereas Alabama has shown that they have a little bit of a weakness against the run. I mean, they still have a good run defense, but I'm just talking about relative weaknesses at this level. And so I do think Alabama has that relative weakness. Both offenses are obviously elite. Both coaches are great. Both coaches are really good in these types of games, where it's even talent or, small spreads. Both coaches have historically been really good in these types of games. So, I don't think there's much of an edge at all in either way. A little bit of a matchup edge with Georgia, I think, because Alabama hasn't been great against the run. My math model using this year's games only makes it Georgia by 3.5. My priors would have made it 2.5. I think the fair line is 3. The line's 2.5. I don't really see enough value to bet the game. So I'm just going to sit in the sidelines and watch it.
And your math model certainly includes what happened against Kentucky, very close game that they squeaked out, and also includes that Kentucky got thrashed by South Carolina the week before, right? Like that's all in there.
Yeah, it's a big, it takes into account, who you played, who the teams you've played have played, who the teams you've played have played. I mean, it's just the model works to solve for how good you are, how good your stats look. And it just continued as compensation, then a compensation, then what I'm talking about, but it just continually is refining itself until it comes up with a number that is not changing. If you did another level of compensation, you come up with basically the same number. So it just continues to churn the compensation numbers until they don't move anymore, and that's the number.
Yeah, it's solving a system of equations.
Yes.
So the way I'm doing it is a little bit different in college football, but my model reacts a lot to that Kentucky game. So I actually have Alabama favored, and I don't really think that's right. I still think Georgia's the best team in the nation. I think they were definitively the best team in the nation coming into the season. Obviously, we need to account for what has happened, and the Kentucky game just doesn't look good. But, as you mentioned, the Clemson win
looks real good, and look how good Clemson's been since they played, And
I'm not sure that that's going to stop for Clemson.
They're finally letting Garrett Riley run his offense. The thing that bothered me about Clemson is they get Garrett Riley in, who was an offense coordinator at Baylor, I think at SMU before that. TCU.
TCU.
I'm sorry. TCU, SMU, and then TCU. And they went to the national championship game. And Dabo Sweeney brings him in because they've been struggling on offense. And And I'm looking at Clemson last year and thinking they're going to improve offensively, and they don't. And I'm like, what is going on here? And I talked to someone who was pretty close to the Clemson program, and he says, the thing that bothered me was Dabo Sweeney says, I did not bring him in here to run. I brought him in here to run the Clemson offense. I was like, oh, so well, the Clemson offense sucks. So if you brought in a great young mind, a young offensive coordinator with a good mind to run the Clemson offense, you're not going to get any better. Let him run his offense. So my Clemson fan was just so frustrated that they were running basically the same offense that had been struggling the last few years, even though they got the offensive coordinator who had brought his team to a national championship game. It was one of those like, you got to be kidding me. What are we doing here? And it looks like finally he's let, especially after the Georgia game, he's just let Garrett Riley run his offense more. So he's kind of taken the training wheels off, and now Clemson is rolling. Right. So it'll be interesting.
And that conference is completely different with Florida State not looking anything like
Miami's the team, right?
Yeah, and Miami. Yeah, I mean Miami certainly, but things are definitely looking up for Clemson. Bob, I also wanted to ask you about Michigan and how you change your ratings because they made a quarterback change after week 3. Davis Warren is more of a passer. They benched him because of interceptions. Alex Orji came in, more of a runner last week against USC. How would you go about making a change, accounting for a change like that?
Well, I account for, I adjust for all kinds of things. Not only do I adjust for, quarterbacks and maybe running backs getting hurt or whatever, but I not only adjust the team that that's made the change, but I will adjust. And here's the thing with Michigan. I mean, Orji was not his problem. He didn't get the job because he was an inconsistent passer. And that's been the word on him. And he did not win the job because his passing was inconsistent. And everybody knows he's a good runner, but they wanted a consistent passer. Now, Davis Warren was not great as a passer, but he's clearly better than Alex Orji because if you watched the game last week, which I'm sure you did, they didn't let him throw the ball down the field. I mean, they only threw it, 13 times, maybe the whole game, and really didn't take any chances with him throwing the ball more than 5 yards down the field. I mean, it was just like they do not trust him. But so obviously the passing numbers are going to be worse. They're going to pass less. I'll adjust my model for that. His running numbers weren't great. I mean, he's run 21 times this year for 111 yards. That's nothing special. What I do think it allows Michigan to do is run more of that read option, and it makes the defense hesitate a little bit more. Is he going to keep the ball and run, or is he going to hand it off, which is something they didn't have to worry about when Warren was the quarterback, because Warren wasn't going to run. So I think the running game will be better, even though his contribution is not much or hasn't been much so far. I just think the running game will be better because the defense has to account for the quarterback possibly keeping the ball. But if Orji were the better quarterback going into the season, he'd have won the job in the summer. I think it was a desperate move, and I do not think Michigan is going to be necessarily better offensively because of the move. And they busted a few big plays on the run game last week with the running backs. But you can't count on that every week. I mean, they had 2 or 3 long runs. You cannot count on that every week. And I think it was a mistake. I think Warren should be back at quarterback because at least they have more of a balanced attack. But he's, Orji's going to start again because they beat USC and he'll keep starting. But so I do adjust for that stuff. And as I get more data in after every game, I'll adjust more and more and more, to what the reality of the situation is. And not only do I adjust Michigan, I adjust every team that Michigan's played, whether you faced, Warren at quarterback or whether you faced Orji at quarterback. So I'm adjusting on multiple layers in my model. We'll see how it works out, but I do adjust for those things.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what Michigan does moving forward. Orji clearly is going to start again because they won, but they also had a pick 6 that obviously impacted that game when you only win by however many they won by.
Barely at the end.
So
unfortunately, because I have USC's win total over, so I was really rooting for USC. I think I'll still get over 7.5 wins with USC, but it would have been nice to lock that one in.
For sure. I mean, did you see a lot of improvement on the defensive side of the ball, or with the new coordinator? What was the?
Oh yeah, D'Anton Lynn came over from UCLA, and they had my 9th rated defense last year. So now he's the defense coordinator at USC, and USC's talent their talent rating on defense is in the top 20. I'm like, okay. And I made them last year. They were basically in the middle of the pack in compensated defense, compensated yards per play allowed. And I said, all right, well, I'm not going to make them number whatever they were on defensive talent rating, like 18th or something. And I ended up making them 54th going into the season. I was like, all right, well, we'll put them here because I can only move them up so much, based on the algorithms I have. So I moved them up and they ended up 54th in my ratings on defense. And they probably are a little bit better than that, but we'll see. I mean, after a few more games, they've only played 3 games, so we haven't quite got the 4-game sample that I'm looking for, but I definitely thought they'd be better defensively, and they have looked it. They're certainly tougher against the run. I mean, you saw it against LSU, couldn't run against them. Michigan hit some big plays, but success rates weren't that great for Michigan's run game. They had 370-something yards or 350 rushing yards, but there was a lot of big plays. So I think that was sort of an outlier. And I do think USC's run defense is pretty solid, and the pass defense, they have good secondary talent, and they seem a lot more. They just look confused the last couple of years defensively in the secondary. They gave up a lot of big plays, and I haven't really seen that this year. So I think USC is much improved. I also didn't think Caleb Williams' loss was that big of a deal. Everybody thought the sky was going to fall. But the thing about, Lincoln Riley, in the quarterbacks he's had as offense coordinator at Oklahoma, as a head coach at Oklahoma, as a head coach at USC, all those quarterbacks he's had, Williams was the second worst quarterback he's ever had. Only Spencer Rattler was worse than Williams in Lincoln Riley's system. And Miller Moss was damn good in the bowl game against Louisville. He was better than Williams. Right. He averaged 11 yards a pass playing the bowl game. So I'm like, they're not going to – losing Williams is not going to be an issue. The offense is going to be great because Lincoln Riley's offenses are always great, and Williams was the second worst quarterback he's ever had. So I thought Miller Moss is just going to be just without the running element. Moss doesn't run like Williams runs, but I thought the offense is going to be fine. Losing Taj Washington, the wide receiver, was a bigger issue in my ratings than losing Williams, the quarterback. So I thought USC was underrated on both sides of the ball coming into the season.
If you eliminated 2023 for Williams, where he wasn't as good and just took his Heisman year, like, was there like a huge discrepancy between those two seasons?
He was actually better in compensated yards per pass play last year than he was in 22.
Fascinating. Yep. Bob, please tell us about all the services that are available at Dr. Bob Sports.
Well, first of all, you don't have to pay to go on the site. In the NFL especially, every game is written up in detail, and only the games that are for subscriber information. There are subscriptions. There's a week pass or a 4-week package or a season pass that you can buy in both college and NFL. But if you don't, want to invest that much, that's fine. You can go to the site on Fridays, or usually Thursday. I post the NFL stuff, usually by Thursday morning sometime. All the games that are not part of the subscriber package are on the site for free, and it's good for fantasy. There's a lot of matchup analysis, which people that play fantasy have been like, this is just great stuff. The matchup stuff that's done. Really in-depth write-ups in the NFL. So, and you'll get some, good bets based on that. And in college, and I have what I call leans, and I mark them as leans, have historically been good, especially in college football. The leans have been 55% for 11 years. It's fantastic. I wish I'd been betting more of those, to be honest. So on Friday, I spend the day working on the college analysis and posting predicted scores and some write-ups. Sometimes I don't have time to write up every game. Usually I don't. But there's a bunch of games on the free analysis page on college football, which you can look at and look for the leans. And like I said, those have been profitable over the years. And I try to write up the games, the marquee games, and then at least put predicted scores on every single game on the schedule. So that's drbobsports.com, drbobsports.com. And if you go there, you'll see the menu, and you can go to the free analysis pages and check that out. If you're interested in subscription, if you have questions, you can email me. So there you go.
There's so much awesome free stuff over there. I highly recommend checking it out. I definitely featured some stuff last week in my newsletter. I plan on doing some more just because, there's so much, just with the write-ups for college football. It's really good. So Bob Stoll, thank you so much for joining me this week on the Football Analytics Show. And please, everyone, go check that out. Bob, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, Ed, for having me.
You've been listening to the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. Just a reminder, you can grab my free sports betting newsletter. You'll get 5 Nuggets Saturday, my curated list of tips and analytics. Go check that out at thepowerrank.com. I will talk to you again next week.